So, welcome to episode 84 of No Shame. We have Professor Dan Healy, probably one of the smartest men I've had on the couch. Sorry to all the other guests out there, but Dan's probably the smartest man on the couch. Definitely one of the most interesting men on the couch. Dan, to me, I've probably known you for over 10 years now, Dan.
Yeah,
probably
yes.
more now, you know what I mean? And I would always go out of my way to say you're a stand-up guy as a person, but you're incredibly interesting as well. I've said this to you on the way in. I love the way you are very much aligned by the right thing. Like, I think you would. I don't think you align yourself with, have buddies if you way. I think the truth for you is the most important thing, and you go through it. And I know because I've had my own little tiffles with you as going on. In any way, but you're a neurologist in Beaumont. You've been doing this for many years now.
Neurology,
Yeah.
I guess about 20 years.
Did I read that you've won like quizzes on neurology?
Yeah, but this is about MMA,
Absolutely.
right? So let's do
But
the
listen,
MMA, yeah.
Yeah. So how are you an MMA fan then?
I'm not an MMA fan, or at least whether I am an MMA fan
Combat
or
fan.
not is irrelevant, actually. Really, it is irrelevant.
Are you though?
I think it's irrelevant because it doesn't help MMA or fighters to be a team player, right? In fact, the worst type of doctors are fan doctors for sport. So athletes, fighters, they deserve to be treated in exactly the same way, the same standards as you would treat anybody else, any other patient. And so being the team doctor is fine as long as you're not playing with the team. So ask me, am I a fan of MMA fighters? That's a very different question. Big fan of MMA fighters. For me, they're the best of our country. They are disciplined, they're ambitious. You can see it in their eyes, you can see it still in your eyes. They're the guys that would fill the ranks of Na Fianna and Grania and her 1,000 warriors, Fado. They're exactly the same people. They're the same guys that would, the young Irelanders, the Ogluk and Arian Mock, Nakoska. The current 2019 MMA or combat fighters, boxers, to me they're exactly the same type of people that those guys are, and they deserve the best. I'm a huge fan of fighters. You don't see fighters hanging around bus stops worrying old women, or that's not what fighters do. They have ambition, they're disciplined, and actually it's why I'm annoyed that when people start using terms like barbaric or brutal to describe MMA, because sort of by definition you taint the fighters, and they're anything but barbaric. They're the best of our country, and I'm a huge fan of theirs. Yeah, whether I'm a fan of MMA is irrelevant, really.
Irrelevant.
And I wouldn't be doing the sport any services if I was a fan.
No,
Yeah.
I know, and that is it, because, as you said, being
or not a fan,
being emotionally connected to something like that is
Yeah.
probably not the best idea.
For that, being involved in combat sport, I've been for a long time now, and if I made decisions based on being a fan of that fighter, I'm doing that fighter a disservice. I think that fighter deserves exactly the same. Sorry for cutting across you, but they deserve exactly the same standard of medical care as any other citizen in Ireland.
Would it safe to say you're a fan of spirit? You'd be a fan of the
I'm
human
a fan of
spirit
fighters.
And all fighters. I think generations that goes back. Yeah. Your heart is in Ireland for sure.
Yeah,
I've had good conversations with you about
is in Ireland.
Your
I
heart
swear I want to die, as what's his name?
Your heart is definitely in
Count
Ireland.
McCormack used to sing.
So let's get into
the
it
old
anyway.
Bog Road.
So we might as well start at the start. So let's go back to when Safe MMA was getting introduced, when this was starting. So Safe MMA was becoming an organised, this was bringing MMA out of the Wild West, am I right?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago now, I've told the story a few times. I remember I wasn't long back from London, and a young fella came into Beaumont with headache. He came in the morning, and he was ataxic, so he was a bit unsteady. And it turned out that he had fought on a card the night before. There was no doctor on that card. His parents didn't want him to be on the card. They didn't know he was in Beaumont that next morning. And so anyway, between the jigs of the wheels, it turned out he had a small little brain hemorrhage, a little one, little parenchymal hemorrhage. He didn't need any surgery, didn't need anything other than just basically best medical care. And we gave that to him, but he ended up self-discharging himself. And to my horror, about 6 weeks later, he was back fighting again. I always remember he was there, he was fighting again. I couldn't do anything, of course. I have a confidentiality to a fighter, which I'd always would always observe. But I felt that that fighter was not being protected, was not being guided, and deserved more. So that was in my head. And then about 2012, we try and run free educational seminars for fighters, and we do it for boxers. Now we do it for boxers and MMA fighters about once a year. And Aisling Daly happened to be at one that we had in 2012 in the College of Surgeons, and we got chatting. At the time she was a world champion. She was about 15 and 2. I knew about her. I think she hadn't fought Rosie Sexton yet. I think, that was
on Cage Warriors.
Yeah.
If she was world champion, she had fought Jessica Oi.
Okay.
She had just fought.
Yeah, that was in America. I think.
Yeah, she became the first Irish person to ever become a world title holder.
So anyway, she and I got chatting, and it turned out she had exactly the same kind of thing. She was interested in maybe trying to bring a little bit of order to and improve the see things from the perspective of a fighter rather than the perspective perhaps of a promoter. I have nothing against promoters; they're excellent. They put on shows. I've broadly met only excellent promoters, but they have an obvious conflict of interest.
You haven't met them all, did you?
Yeah, I haven't met them. But there is a little bit of a conflict of interest. They're promoting an event to make money, and safety costs money, and so we thought, let's do it from the perspective of the fighter. And so a short time later, myself and herself and Tim Murphy in Galway and Rodney Moore up in the north, and Joe Clifford, we met and we said, let's try and actually do something about this. Rather than talk about it, let's actually try and do something. So
would it be safe to say that was probably like the footprint of the start of all of this? Yeah.
So that was in about 2012, and it turned out that they were having the same thought process in London.
Yes.
Mark Goddard and Rosie and Graham Boylan, Jude Samuel, Izzy Cornwall, Jack Kreiner, who's a doctor, and Mike Loosemore, who I knew, and they had basically done the Safe MMA logo and so on. And so I rang Mike and said, look, we kind of want to do the same thing in Ireland, and they said, yeah, you can piggyback onto what we're doing, and that's what happened. And the project has grown since that time, slowly, bit by bit. The standard has changed as we have been able to achieve things. We didn't achieve everything we wanted at the start. We still haven't achieved everything that we want, of course, but that's how it began. And now, I guess there's a couple of thousand fighters throughout the project that have gone through it, and in Ireland maybe 700 or 800, I'm guessing at this point. And I think, broadly speaking, our motto that we are here for the fighters. We are here to make fighter safety independent of promotion or running of contests, has been, I think, successful. I think certainly, I think fighters think that.
So, on the Safe MMA, what was the main goal at the start of it? Would the main goal have been for the bloods? Would it? Because that would have been probably the most dangerous part, in my eyes. Because I remember thinking about this, going, how do we not what if he had like you wouldn't have sex with someone without wearing protection? So you wouldn't roll around a cage with bodily fluids going everywhere in a cage. So to me, that would have been one of the high risk things. That I mean, maybe the gestalt, the whole concept that
that actually the fighter has a role here as well, and should be at the centre of this. I think that probably has been the biggest success that broadly now promotions know that they don't, you know, that if we say a fighter is green carded, they are safe to compete. If we say they're not safe to compete. I think fighters know that we do everything possible to assist them to being able to compete, and it's only very, very seldom that we would have to, that a fighter couldn't compete, so I think maybe the whole concept of, you know, putting the fighter first has probably been the biggest success. I think the annual medical of all the things that we do actually has a bigger pickup rate than the blood tests. I think the scans have a bigger pickup rate than the blood tests. In fact, truthfully, the pickup rate in Ireland has been, for communicated diseases, we've had one or two hits for hepatitis and HIV, but of course, maybe you could argue that if we didn't do this, you know, people who perhaps know they have these conditions no longer subject themselves to the process if they know that they have HIV or hepatitis. But our pickup rate has been relatively small, and we to the point that actually 3 years ago we reduced the frequency of testing for HIV and hepatitis to on an annual basis. That was based on reducing a cost-benefit analysis, basically. That if we were it's a little different, let's say, in IMMAF, where bloods are every 6 months, but IMMAF deals with countries like, you know, countries where, you know, some of the member countries in the IMMAF community of nations have HIV rates of 20% in young men. So yeah, of course they have to have a different rigor. Yeah,
I actually remember it, like no one's name or anything like that, but I remember Safe MMA when I first was like, whoa, I'm glad that's there. Someone was waiting on someone's bloods to come back, and there was a show going on, and it was close. I think they were nearly at the weigh-in, and they were waiting on the bloods to come back, and it came back that the opponent had hepatitis.
Yeah. So there are lots of close run things. Yanni, anyone who knows Yanni, who's the administrator for the project, and you know, he goes out of his way, like, you know, to try and bring something in at last minute. There are still a lot of last minutisms in the project, but the less the better for us. But yeah, and the thing that I think people accept now is that there is no nod and wink thing. There is no, okay, yeah, you're all right this time. If you don't meet the standard is there for anyone to see, the government to see, the parents of a fighter to see, the promotion, insurance companies, they can see what the standard is, and they know that we do that at a 100% rate. That's why the project, I think, sometimes upsets people, because they don't always get what they might want. If you don't have it in on the time, we're not going to say, Irish, or he's all right, let him off.
There is no, and I would stand by that as well, because there is no nods, and even when it's frustrating sometimes, because everyone loves a bleeding nod every now and again, but it doesn't work like that. It would be a perfect example of that myself, because I think if there was a nod to go to benefit the sport, me still fighting would be a huge nod to go. So that's not going to, if that nod can't happen, I don't think there is no nods. I'm just saying that for my own word. My words are that there's no nods. The Jake Cavallo thing. So I know you haven't talked about that yet. So you haven't come out and talked. We haven't had we haven't had a conversation about it.
I've never spoken about it, actually. Yeah, so the only time I've ever spoken about Jake Cavallo was at his inquest, where there was a formal inquest, and it's probably not a bad time to talk about it. It's something that personally affected me quite a lot.
Same as myself. I'll just explain to people. So Jake Cavallo was a fighter who tragically died in Ireland. It's a very, very, very small percentage of people that have ever competed in MMA that have died. More people in probably 10 years that have gone to Everest have multiplied the amount of people that have died in MMA. So it's a very small thing, but unfortunately in Ireland this did happen. I was there that night, Dan was there that night, so I feel comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. It's deaths in MMA are relatively uncommon, although There was a young amateur died in Brazil, Mateus Fernandes, 2 months ago. So it does happen. And
Did he die in a fight, or was that cutting weight?
no, he died in a fight, unfortunately. And Joe actually wasn't the first time that I was physically present for a fighter to die. I was actually in White Hart Lane as a kid in 1991 when the magnificent Michael Watson, a super middleweight, was fighting Chris Eubank. We were in the miles back, and on the 12th round, anyway, the fight was stopped. Now, and thankfully, Michael Watson didn't actually die, but what happened that night changed boxing forever, professional boxing. He had an evolving brain hemorrhage, exactly the same as Zhao had, and the sequence of events to get him from the ring to a neurosurgical hospital that could actually treat him was chaotic. And poor old Michael Watson, is one half of his body is hemiparetic ever since. So he survived, but professional boxing almost didn't survive after the Michael Watson case in 1991. That was over 25 years ago now. So I didn't think that I'd see in my own backyard almost the precise same thing happen again in MMA. So Zhao was a young Portuguese father who came to our country as a visitor to fight. There were flaws in the way in which that contest was being, the safety of the way that contest was set up, that we tried to highlight in advance to the promoters, but they
Did I hear somewhere you gave 10 emails or something?
There were emails to them trying to highlight, yes, it's true
Safety.
that, so I had to give under oath evidence to the inquest, and there were multiple emails to the promoters of that about concerns about airway concerns, about planning for emergencies that they didn't listen to, and as a consequence, this young fighter who had a tough fight. I was there. I bought a ticket and went to see it. I was professionally not involved at all, but it wasn't the tough fight that killed him.
No,
it was the fact that he, shortly after he left the ring, he basically lost consciousness. Again, everything I'm saying here has been said in open court at his inquest, with his brother present and a jury of 12 Irish people listening to it in a corner. No one could control his airway, so he went unconscious, he went stiff. There were people there with certificates to say, just as I have a certificate to say that I can control an airway, I can intubate. But when was the last time I intubated? So to be able to control an airway, something you have to be doing in your day job.
Would that be something like an anaesthetic?
Anaesthetist, an emergency physician, somebody who's doing it on a regular basis, not somebody who has a certificate or has a medical degree that does it, or who may have done it on in a controlled hospital setting in some old person who's had a heart attack where they're lying flaccid. When fighters go down, they're half awake. There's thousands of people around you. It's frenetic. And what happened to Zhao was that they couldn't control his airway. He went blue. He then vomited. He swallowed his own vomit. The lack of a forethought and planning to bring him to the right place meant that he basically fell off the stretcher onto the floor of the ambulance. He was brought on the floor of the ambulance to what had been planned to be Beaumont, because Beaumont is the only place that can deal with brain hemorrhage in Dublin, and they had no airway.
That's exactly what happened as well.
They had no airway, and they hadn't the skill to, so they had to divert to the Mater. And I remember.
So should they not have gone to Beaumont straight away?
Well, ABC is you have to control airway.
Okay.
So because if you can't breathe, you're going to die. But obviously, the guy had an evolving subdural hemorrhage. The fighter had an evolving subdural brain hemorrhage, and that's what needed to be dealt with. But they had to control he needed to airway first before anything. So anyway, so I heard that he that he was in the matter. I couldn't understand why he was in the matter. I rang Beaumont to say, this guy's on your way, and they said no, we didn't heard nothing. And so anyway, discovered he was in the matter. So I went flying out to the matter, and he was in the emergency department there. He had just been brought in for a CT scan. We saw the CT scan, a big subdural.
Just before you move over,
Yeah.
so while it was all going on, as you said, put in the ambulance. We was standing at the back of the ambulance, so I remember seeing him going into the ambulance, and I remember just being like, "He's not going to make it." But that's just literally what I said. You know what I mean? There was someone else standing beside me as well, but we were in a situation where this was happening so fast, and like the amount of people from MMA that were actually in that building that day that were affected, as you said, I got affected by that. Look, I remember being seriously affected by that because I'm standing there as a fighter. And not only that,
you have a bone in the fight, so to speak.
And I have hemophilia. So it was like,
and
shit.
you've had brain hemorrhages.
And I've had brain hemorrhages. Yeah. Cheers, Dan. Nobody knows that. Nobody listens. They do. When I was a kid, not in front of fights. When I was a kid, Jobstown's injuries, nothing else. But so, where are you in the situation when this was going? When he was being,
well, I was in the matter at that point. So I was in the matter
around the ambulance and stuff like that. Did you know that this was serious from the time?
No, actually, I didn't know. I was the fighting continued.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I had seen the contest. I wasn't professionally involved in any way, so I didn't think. But I do remember seeing him walk out, and there were a few little things. He had some what you call lateral pulsion, and so I do remember going down and saying to the ringside doctors, that guy should not go into the medical room. He should go directly into the ambulance and out to Beaumont, because I felt that time shouldn't be wasted. Now, to be fair, that was probably arguably the right thing to do, was that he go into the medical room to assess in the normal way. But I really had some concerns at that time. And anyway, so in the Mater Hospital, just to give you a sense of the lack of planning, so he was there. The ambulance that brought him there were asked not to go.
Not to leave?
Not to leave, because in my head, this guy needs to get to Beaumont. Ambulances are not as easy to get as you can think of. Yeah. But they left. And they left because the fighting continued.
And they wanted to get back to
and there was no ambulance then. So they had to be an ambulance because the fighting continued. Yeah. Now, they didn't know, of course, in total extreme fighting that the trouble I think that Joe was in at that stage. But we then had the situation when he was stabilised.
He stopped bleeding. He stopped breathing, basically. Like.
Well, he was back breathing again. So in the Mater, they were able, of course, they had the experience of controlling an airway, and his breathing had been restored.
Would it be right in saying that the TEF had realised that there was something wrong with his airwaves at that time when he was sending the ambulance? But do you know what I'm saying?
I'll just tell you what happened. I don't know what but we then had a situation in the Mater where myself and one of the other people there actually had to say, how are we going to get an ambulance? I got onto ambulance control. I said, have you any ambulances? This guy needs to get to Beaumont as an emergency, like as in now. And they literally hadn't. So we went into the car. We were running around the car park in the Mater Hospital trying to find an ambulance to get him there, because there was none. And luckily we met an ambulance that was off duty, planning to head back, I think, to Navan or somewhere like that. And once they heard, of course, they quickly turned themselves back on again and brought him straight into theatre and straight to Beaumont. He bypassed everything, straight into theatre, skull taken off, dura, incised, pressure of the hemorrhage came out, and job done. 5-minute job to take the pressure off. But unfortunately, that was a lot longer than it should have been, and so the uncus, or the temporal lobe, had descended through the foramen magnum, pressing the upper part of his brainstem, the mesencephalon, where what we call the reticular activating system, the consciousness centres of the brain. He coned, in other words, and that was really, the prognosis was terrible from that point in time.
Saying that
his pupils were fixed and dilated; they weren't reacting.
Pressure blew, was kind of pushing down.
Yeah, and that's what happens in subdural or extradural hemorrhage, which are the big two for fighters. And so I think for those who think that the current safety measures that we have to avoid that they did not have to, at 4 o'clock on that Saturday night, on the 10th of April, have to ring up his brother. I did, and have to tell him, you need to come over here, because and his brother was already very worried, because Zhao always rang him straight after a contest. That was some rule they had, and no one was ringing him, and he didn't understand. And when you're on the other end, this poor brother was in England at the time where he was working, and you don't. I didn't need to see him to know what was happening to him, just from talking, just from the words, and then a day or two later, they were part of the process of withdrawing care, and he was pronounced dead.
He just did not respond after the.
His pupils were fixed and dilated, and really, at that point, generally, there's no hope.
When there's no reaction in your
when
eyes.
the brainstem isn't functioning. Yeah.
Is it a good I won't say a good kind of signal to look at somebody's eyes regarding if they get a bang or something like that? That's to do with the pupils. Yeah,
I mean, it has some value. I think actually the way the eyes move is more important, but that pupillary thing that you see all the time, it looks for asymmetry. Truthfully, if there's asymmetry in the pupils because of an evolving brain hemorrhage, which is what they were, but you're not standing up there. You're on the floor at that point generally anyway. But really, it's a way of. Sometimes the little light you see shining is really just a mechanism by which you can start looking at eye movement and looking at the fighter in general. And someone who's trained in that way will know what to pick up. When the pupils are dilated, usually the guy's on the floor. He's not standing up.
Okay.
But
so this set off the event of nobody knew what was going to happen then. So nobody really knew. Was MMA going to be banned? Was no one knew? That's basically it. Like I didn't know whether I was going to fight anymore after that. I know there was other people that was like, I don't know what I'm done now. Do you know what I mean? Because as I said, you said there as well, a lot of the people that would be coming through, especially guys that are just fighting now that are young, probably 18, 19 years of age. This was what we thought 5 years ago.
It was over about 3.5 years. So it was he fought on the 9th of April 2016.
So we've got kids, lads that would have been 15 years of age when this was going on, and now they're probably 18 years of age, or that mature age to be able to make decisions whether they want to fight and stuff like that. Yeah. You do hear a lot about the new changes and criticism of them. As I said, there's no money in the world for me if I was getting back in there to secure that I knew that I felt alright, and I knew that that everyone around me knew what was going on if something did go wrong.
Yeah.
So I don't understand people's argument on the idea of money is money, but let me tell you one thing: you can have €10,000 in your bank account, but then something like this goes on, you would give every penny of that at that moment to make sure that this stops. And
his 3 children would give every penny they have to have their dad back.
I don't hear a lot of fighters moaning about this.
Yeah, I don't either. I never hear fighters.
That's something that annoys me. I usually hear coaches that are annoyed about it. To me, it's like, yeah, we should have a choice, but then that would be a gym culture then, am I right? So it's like, you get a scan, and it becomes this culture where...
Fighters are not mindless animals.
No.
Fighters have fast brains. What makes a good fighter is a fast brain.
Yeah, I've heard you saying that. I don't
Everything about fighting, about being a good competitor, is about your brain.
Reactions.
How speedy your brain is, how well you process slipping before you see the punch. That's when a fella slips, it hasn't had time to go to the visual cortex. It goes through a much older pathway.
Reaction.
That's a 10 milli.
Subconscious, sorry, is it?
Well, it's not. It is subconscious.
Subconscious.
It is subconscious, but it goes through the brainstem actually, through a much older pathway. Our reptilian brain, as you might say, rather than our thinking brain. You don't visually process a punch coming towards you and say, "Oh, I must move to the right." It's a very different process. Similarly, timing of punches.
Would this be like if I say threw a pen at you or something and you catch it?
I guess, yeah. It's a different pathway, but
is it?
a slightly more complex pathway, yeah. So this is what's called the tectospinal, whereas to catch involves, you do have to visually process where the thing that being thrown to you actually is in space to be able to actually initiate your premotor cortex to grab it. So it's a slightly more complex task, but broadly speaking, yeah,
So
it's
say
similar.
if somebody goes to hit you or you get burned or you the reaction to get your
Yeah, so burning is a very old reflex, a Cartesian reflex that so that's very much subconscious. But you do have to be consciously aware to catch something, because you need to know where the object you're about to catch is in space and what speed it's. So it involves processing speed and angle and vision and so on. Timing a punch is the same. So timing a punch, which is again is a brain. Yeah. You have. Conor McGregor has knockout power. He's not a very strong man. There are plenty of people with bigger punches there, but he has a brain that times a punch. He knows how to process the cerebellum, the basic ganglia, and so on. So fighters can suppress tiredness in a fight. Fighters sleeping the night before, all of those things are brain skills. So these guys have fast brains, and they are interested in their brains. And so that concept of fighters being against brain scans, I don't see it. Yeah. 2 days before a contest, if they haven't had their scans, they're in cleared or uncleared mode. Of course, they're in fight mode and they just want a clear scan. But in the cold light of day, that's not what I see. I see fighters who are interested in their brains. They're interested in their brains, normal or not. And if there are abnormalities on their brain scans, I would also have to say, and there rarely are. You may want to talk about that, but we don't have to retire. Once or twice maybe has a fighter not wanted to make that decision themselves. Fighters, they compete to enhance their lives, broadly speaking. It's not a do or die situation for them. There are, you might say you are an exception because of your the circumstances you talk about. But broadly speaking, fighters, they hear the evidence. They're intelligent young men and women, and they make, if they're given a chance, they make their own decisions, and they always make the right one, in my experience.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I thought a lot of stuff that gets the fighters in there, that would get a fighter in there, is what keeps you in there sometimes. As you were saying, these kind of these types of people, and it is you are a fighter or not a fighter. Do you believe that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Do you believe that, some people
absolutely,
take up the form of a fighter, and they look at it, but like people like Artem and people like people that when it really comes down to it.
So I think one of it is true that if people have got to, let's just say Artem's stage, he didn't, his first scan was in whenever, like 10 or 15 years into his fight career, but I'm sure I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that. Yeah. But so he's a different mentality. But the current group of young fighters, I think it's a little bit different. I think if we're only starting to take fighter safety serious when they get to the UFC, then again we have failed them.
Absolutely,
we have failed them.
Absolutely.
So
IMMAF. So what is IMMAF? What is IMMAF to you? And what is all of these?
IMMAF to me
is
the Irish Museum of Modern Arts. I've been a member for years. So IMMAF is I'm not a member or affiliated in any way to IMMAF.
And I want to clear this up as well, because obviously, I watch nobody say anything bad about any good man, and this has been Australia, and I'll say it. So, in this situation, you're not affiliated with any clubs, am I right? You don't have a membership to a club.
No.
So this is what I'm trying to unmask these things. You don't have members. You're not affiliated to any clubs. To me, I think you're a very straight man.
I know a lot of fighters from lots of clubs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Some of my. If you're asking me about SPG, do I have good friends in SPG over the years? Yeah, I do. Very much so. Yeah, but also in other clubs.
And Rhino and all sorts of.
Again, please, it's not about me. It's about the fighters, and we do not have a policy that if you're not, Safe MMA is not an SPG organisation or anything like that. And again, I would ask the fighters that question. Ask them, are they treated any differently? Do we even ask them what club they're part of? We don't actually.
There's not even part on the form, I don't think, isn't there?
No, there isn't.
So it wouldn't make sense, do they? Yeah. But now, obviously, when something comes along, there's always going to be these, everyone's going to have their opinions of you most. And then the worst thing about opinions is that it becomes the ones that want it make it sometimes seem better, and the ones that don't want it scaremonger and make it seem worse. And then you have this group in the middle that just want to get on, that just want shows running, want to work together, and that's the main thing of it. And I find that when you're on both sides, so say someone's on the left or someone's on the right, you have a situation where there might be an underlying the decisions that they're making that's not for the best of who's in the middle.
Yeah.
I want what's in the middle, and that's like, I think people need to state that. So all these people that are arguing and are scaremongering and are like, oh yeah, well, if you don't like it, piss off, or well, I want to do my own thing. Like, there's only one way to do it. There's only one way to do it, I think, where everybody is doing it for the greater good of everybody.
No, for the greater good of the fighters.
Yeah, well, everybody to me is the fighters.
Is the fighters. It must be.
To me, as a fighter, everybody is the fighters to me. So they're my students, they're people. I have a relationship with them in that way, and I want them to be safe. My point on the brain scan is that you get a map of your brain. You get one picture of your brain before you start your competitive career. Like, if I was to ask you, listen, do you want me to let you look inside your head? It's €150.
Yeah.
It's not an MRI. It's not the fight. It's like, really, as a fighter, this can actually improve you as well, because you can start to see the parts of your brain and understand what's what and what you have and what you don't have. Like, I remember you having a brain up on the screen before in was the College of Surgeons, I think it was.
Yeah, that was Connor's brain, actually. Connor's brain. The fastest brain there's out there.
He done a story and he told the whole story before he said it was Connor's brain, and then he said it was Connor's brain, and then everyone was like, whoa! And I was like, but it was just the brain at the start of it. Now, I was truly interested because I was thinking, I think that's the part of my brain that I had a surgery on. I think this, and I was looking at the brain, of course. I'm interested in the brain. I'm interested in the, as you said, the reptilian part and how we react through these different nerves and different ways feelings come, and up subconscious thinking and conscious thinking and dreaming and all of this kind of stuff. So, is it not smart for us to be able to pay €150 for something that's going to last us for 20 years? Because if you're in 20 years' time, if you feel like, I just don't feel right, and I know as a fighter, so if you're not a fighter and you say you're a coach and you have got a problem with the brain scans, you kind of don't have a say. That's my idea, because you're not the one getting in there taking the punches. You're not the one that probably has to look at your children in the eye and say, am I right? Because I remember after fights being, I don't know whether you just be tired or just exhausted, but just a little bit like, just not right for a little bit, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Maybe I was just tired, but I remember coming to you myself in confidence and saying, I'm not getting a bang and I don't feel right. Now, for me to be able to know that we had a brain scan to go back to, now it wasn't done in Ireland, mine was done at the Ultimate Fighter at that time, but I had and I was way into my career as well, but I had a brain scan that, and when I was coming up to taking that brain scan, I was a little bit nervous. I was thinking, sure, I've been taking shots for years now, maybe this is the time. Do I want to find out? Do I want to find out? And I think maybe that's a part of it as well, where people are afraid that, yeah, but he's going to tell me, and like, there's no doctor in the world that's going to put their job or their reputation on the line to ban somebody because they don't like them. That would be a stupid way of thinking. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just, it would be illegal. It would be illegal as well. And like, people, but some people are like, yeah, so what about illegal? But I know when you come to be a doctor and you're putting that time in and all, you're not one of them people. You do care about legal and illegal, because it matters. You know, not just with yourself, but about all doctors. So,
well, I hope we care about the fighter or the patient in front of us above all, primum.
Yes, exactly. And no matter what, so for people to think that you could look at somebody and say, well, he's not SBG, and to treat him different, because when we're talking about brains, this is serious shit here. We're opening the cap of somebody and we're having a look into their head in a way. To me, I think that's very serious. So €150 to be able to look back in 20 years and say to yourself,
yeah,
what's the difference here? Now, am I right in saying, say if we got a little bit, like, I was different, and say something did happen to my brain, I did get bleeds, and then you looked back at my brain at the start and then look back at my brain in 10 years, you'd be able to say, oh, there's changes there, Paddy.
Yeah, so there is some truth in that, yeah. So I might just take a step back because and maybe just talk about the difference between what we do for amateurs and for professions and the rationale for that, first of all, because this does come up in conversation sometimes. And it's probably also worth saying that Ireland is leading the way very much. I think we are looked upon as the leaders in putting fighters at the very forefront of the competition of MMA. So we, 3 years ago now, introduced €150 scan. It's a subsidised scan. It has been for the last 3 years. It's about the cost price of the scan. And anyone who's, it's £135 for our colleagues in the 6 counties, and multiples of that people in the UK would pay for the scan. The purpose of the first scan in an amateur or in a professional is exactly the same. I hear this argument that, it can only be for professionals. The purpose of the scan ab initio, either in professional or an amateur, is to determine are there any pre-existing problems that put that fighter at risk. So you're talking about aneurysms, you're talking about large arachnoid cysts, you're talking about evidence of previous hemorrhage or scarring, you're talking about many other anomalies or whatever that excessive white matter disease, all of those things, and that is relevant whether or not you're an amateur or a professional, right? So you're a professional. Who's in your Nate Enright. You've scrawny little arms. I'd much prefer to be hit by you than I would by Nate Enright, right? Who's an amateur, or Brian Draper, or Ryan Spillane. So just the idea that being hit in, just because you're an amateur, your brain is somehow not immune to the problems of what I've just doesn't make any sense.
So you have seen this argument as well. So what people are saying is that professionals should have MRI scans, but amateurs shouldn't have MRI scans. And I think my own opinion as well, no one else's, is that if we're punching each other in the head, whether the gloves are this thick or a little bit thicker, because we're kicking each other and all of this kind of stuff, but there's no knees. Like, am I right in saying that, like, when that concussion film that I seen, Will Smith, really good, and he says about the idea of how many, like, I don't know how they measure the pressure to a blow, but it's very small. That has to go to complete. So a bang of a helmets together, 2 helmets banging together, that can create these little blades. And
we brought Bennett Amalu, who was who actually Will Smith was playing. He came to the College of Surgeons for a free lecture for fighters a couple of years ago. We've done that to actually hear the evidence themselves. We've tried to run a seminar every. I didn't see you there.
Oh, I'm raging. I would definitely went if he had been there, Dan.
Oh yeah. Anyway, getting back to the MRI scans. So that's the purpose of the initial scan in an amateur or professional, and all of the things that I've just mentioned, the conditions we see at around the same rate in amateurs and in professionals, roughly speaking, around the same rate. And some of them we can fix. People with aneurysms, there have been, they've been fixed. They're back fighting. Some we can't fix, and some are things like, for example, white matter change, where we don't tell a fighter they can't compete, but we do sit down with the fighter. So if you do have something like that, you are required to see a neurologist for free. You'll get seen in Ireland for free by a neurologist quickly, and you'll have a discussion, perhaps with your parents, about what this represents. Our uncertainties, whether because very often we're not sure, is it related to, in fact usually it isn't related to combat sport, but we discuss what we know and what we don't know and the uncertainties and so on, and the fighter makes an informed adult decision about whether they want to compete or not. So lots of what we find is are not barring, but they do again allow these great, intelligent, fast brains to make their own decisions about what they want to do with their fight career going forward, and they may decide, or it may be suggested to them, that they need scans more frequently in that circumstance.
Would a bigger organisation turn people down for these ones? For these ones that you're talking about?
No, because no, I don't think so, because I think the project, Safe MMA, has a reputation right across the world now as being the leader, and I don't mean just the Irish part, I mean the whole of the Safe MMA project, as being the leader in fighter safety, really. And I think what we say people listen to, because I think they recognise that we're not a fan organisation. We are an organisation that treats fighters as patients. We obviously know something about the fight game as well, and in general, but as patients, as human beings, as the greatest of our country, and we try and give them the best possible health service we can at the least possible cost. Now, professional fighters need scans more frequently because, professional MMA is it's a different game. It really is, and they've been around a lot longer. They're exposed to a lot more trauma and probably other diseases as well. So, what we're looking for really in the follow-up scans that professional fighters have, just as professional boxers have had in Ireland and the UK since they learned from Michael Watson. Their rules changed. That we're looking mainly for signs of neuronal loss, neurodegeneration. So, trauma, repeated trauma leading to loss of neuron and leading to loss of function and leading ultimately to a situation where professional boxers, 1 in 5 of them in their mid-40s are dementing. Those are the facts. I look after about 25, maybe a little over 25 boxers in that sort of age range or a bit older, and they were fast brains once. They're now slow brains. They CTE or dementia pugilistica or boxer's dementia, whatever you want to call it, is a horrible disease, and it's one where you begin with personality change, panic attacks, anger problems, impulsivity, drug misuse, all that kind of thing. People sometimes ask me, what's the first sign of CTE? It's usually divorce, because you just become someone different. He's not the man I married, that kind of, those sort of things. And then
people think you're depressed.
That's exactly right. Or, he was a boxer, they're a bit dim anyway, or he's from that social class or whatever, that's the way they go or whatever. But actually often it is a neurochemical process where all those neurochemicals that people talk to you, serotonin, histamine, noradrenaline, dopamine, they're all changing, and eventually it goes from a neurochemical to neurodegenerative disease where you lose neurons, and eventually memory, hard memory problems, and eventually movement, shuffling gait, tremors, Parkinsonism, the quivering rex, we have an opportunity in MMA to go a different route, because in a young sport we have an opportunity that we don't end up with the same figure sort of
I see a thing
figures.
28% of boxers that they examined so many brains, 28% of them that were boxers had CTE.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of difference between what you might see at post-mortem and so at death versus what you making a diagnosis in life, if that makes sense. Right now we're not able to make a diagnosis of CTE with 100% confidence until you actually have the brain.
Okay.
That's going to change very quickly, because our ability to image these proteins, tau protein, is almost at the point where you can start seeing. And that'll actually be a game changer, I think, for the combat sports. When you're starting to see fighters who, I think it will be a game changer. So let's say fighter X, who's winning, in some high level promotion, he's still a fast brain, but the CTE scan, the tau PET scan, for example, shows evidence of tau in his brain, because these things don't start like that. There's a slow, just like Parkinson's disease is 10 years before people lose their sense of smell or their sleep patterns or whatever. That there are preclinical or lead ups or antecedents to the actual degenerative process. So that will be, I think, once we're able to image CTE brains in vivo in living fighters, I think people will start asking questions. There's 100 fighters in Club X competing, and this year 2 of them had CTE, so they were taken out. So there's now 98, and then next year there's another transformer, someone, and I think that's something that all combat sports, and in fact all collision sports, are going to have to grapple with. And I get back to the point that we have in MMA the opportunity to go a different route, so that the current 20-something-year-old fast champions are not in 20 years' time in my clinic shuffling in on their own. They don't come in with their, with their coaches or their, of course they don't come in. The people that who are in the changing room, they're usually not there when things
Absolutely.
fall apart.
So some of the
That's
people
just
that-
human nature. I'm
No,
not saying that in a
absolutely.
critical way.
No, I know this, I know this.
But to do that, Paddy, we do need to do it differently. We do need to change the model, and what.
Because a lot of this stuff, the coach doesn't take home the damage, and that's my opinion on it. You know what I mean? And I think so. When coaches are in trying to improve these things, they're probably a good sign. You know, to me that's a good sign. You know what I mean?
I mean, the whole project would not have worked
But there's a way of doing this as
if
well,
we didn't
because there
have
is going to be a million questions. There is a way of doing this, and to me, in the Irish scene, the dialogue is totally broke down.
So
Totally broke down. So say because the argument that's going to come back all the time is, and you've touched on it there yourself, is that alright, sound. Now you answered the question as well by saying, well, listen, right now MMA is early and it's young and we have a chance. But obviously the question's always going to be, yeah, well, alright, well then what about karate and what about hurling and what about all of these? And were you right in saying that, like, okay, that's someone else's basket of eggs or something? Or because people say, well, do you care less about them? Well, you can't save everyone.
You have to, you try and do something, and if you try and do it well. I am involved in boxing, maybe not to the same extent as MMA now. Boxing has a hierarchical system that has come up. They have pathways that, because they have people like yourself who were fighters and are now in their you're not in your 60s, but you'll be involved in MMA all your life, and in 20 years' time you'll be the elder statesman who is, so they have a hierarchical system. They have people who want to be involved and do the hard backroom work, filling out the forms, all that kind of thing, which very few people truly in MMA want to do now, because most people in MMA are either fighters or coaches. That's going to change as the sport evolves. And boxing, professional boxing, in Ireland and in the UK have the highest possible standards. Now, it is true that the dialogue about MRI scans has changed. It changed after João Carvalho. So they were, you might say, kind of an optional thing that most clubs were going with.
Was there talk about scans coming in before João Carvalho?
Oh yeah, so we were always pressing and trying to build, as I say, little by little, we were trying to bring it in a realpolitik, a real life situation where we were trying to bring people with us, and yes, scans were getting there, but João Carvalho's inquest changed that. So, and people say you must have MRI scans in Ireland because IMMAF say it, or Dan Healy says it, or Shane Ross says it. Okay. That's not the case.
Well, why is it then?
So
who says it?
So João Carvalho's inquest, there were 12 people, Winter and Heron picked 12 jurors that were picked off, some jurors list, who sat and listened to the evidence, and were made the decision that his death was misadventure, but made recommendations to the coroner.
And the 12 people on the stand?
Yeah, the jury.
But would it be safe to say that the jury don't know as much as...
They know enough that they heard the exact sequence of events that led to his death. And it's not for me to say what do they know. That's the whole concept of a jury system.
To figure out who made the decision.
So the jurors at his inquest, they made two recommendations. First was that MMA in Ireland be the regulation and recognition of it as a sport be fast tracked. The government have sort of slowly sort of moving in that direction, I think it's probably fair to say. And the other is that MMA standards match professional boxing until that happens. That was what the jury said. Now, of course, MMA had to follow that. I mean, how could the government not enforce that? How could anyone like myself or Safe MMA go against that? Or any promoter who wants to run an event? You had a guy died. You had a jury of people who had no vested interest. They were there to listen. They weren't promoters. They weren't fighters. They were people, sensible people, you hope. And they made some recommendations, and I can tell you this, that João's family took a lot of comfort from those recommendations, and we shouldn't forget that.
No, absolutely.
He's a guy someday I hope that we will have a statue of that young man, that we will not be ashamed of what happened, that we will say we learned from him and his death, and never again, and. So that's why the scans are here. Ultimately, why they're now from a government perspective anyway, an obligatory thing, and I certainly support that. But it's not me that's saying that. It was the jury that made those recommendations.
So people have said things about like, should they not be optional? So where people can optionally get the scan. So say if you're fighting on a show. So technically, you're right. If we go and fight an IMMAF, we're fighting against people that don't have scans.
Yeah.
So the hypocrisy. How do I say that word again? Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy.
Yes. Yeah, right, that one. How do we have a situation where we are now punching people who don't have scans? Now we don't know whether they have bleeds or previous bleeds or whatever is going on. But now we know we can only control our own eggs, but if them people are allowed to make a decision, should it not be a possibility in Ireland where people can make the decision?
So,
now, as I said, I'm for the scans. I'm for the scans because €150 to have a map of your brain, like it's ridiculous. I've drank €150 on a bleeding Wednesday. I mean, not this Wednesday now.
And that's once ever. Again, for an amateur, you only have to have the scan once, assuming it's normal. So I'm part of IMMAF, the international body. I'm one of the core. There's the core medical group. Myself and 2 American doctors. I've been involved from the start. I think it's a fantastic organisation. The European Championships only recently. Ireland is one of the star countries. There are 70 odd countries in IMMAF now, and we always are well up there in the medals.
No, we will say that, Dan. Right? I will say that this year, right? We need a national scene here. Now it's nothing to do with you, but because people are going to be listening to this, but we were number 2 in the world, and then we brought the biggest team, but we probably brought the smallest medal haul back. Now that's not on the fighters, but to me, that's on the.
That's because of the wrestlers. That's because of the.
Not just preparation. No, it's not. I've got to tell. Not really, because one of my guys beat.
Between Bahrain and Russia, they had 10 gold medals.
Nate beat a lad.
And they were all wrestlers.
Nate beat a lad.
Wrestlers.
That was a wrestler. Yeah. From Canada.
Yeah.
16-0. Yeah. You have to have the technique to get rid of a wrestler.
Nate did, but how did he do in the second round?
Well, he popped his shoulder.
Oh yeah.
So the guys are both the damage happened from the technique he was using in the first round, which is to get back off your back. So everything counters everything, right, when it comes to fighting, and that's what we love about it. So there is the idea we could use the excuse, well, they're all wrestlers, well, they're all kickboxers or they're all strikers in a way. But what I'm trying to say is that if
I don't think any of the West, in fact,
people's point of view.
I'm here to talk about medicine now, but the IMMAF, so as the IMMAF merged recently with the Eastern,
Kazakhstan,
the WAMAs of the World MMA. It brought basically one governing body. I think there's a lesson in Ireland actually there somehow that a friendly merger.
A merger,
but the IMMAF teams just were not used to guys who had wrestled all their life. They just hadn't learned the technique to.
So people's big mistake, people's big fallout about this is that they're saying, MMA is being ruined because all of this. Now it's not because of the scans. That's a cop out. But to me, MMA is being ruined in Ireland because when the scans came in, it split the tree right down the middle, and then we had everybody together, even kind of together, and then they split this way. They're screaming at them, and the only people that are missing in the middle of that is the fighters.
When people say we need, I always like to hear we need this, and I'm going to do it.
I ran a show.
That's what Aisling said in 2012. We need to do something.
And she took it and ran with it.
She ran with it.
I ran a cadet show. Right, which was the cadet rules, the new one coming in, and ran it on the end of a show. Everyone got jerseys. It cost me €900 to run the show. Right, myself. I'm not sitting there talking to somebody saying like, "This is what we need to do." I'm taking action as well. That's what I do. Now, in fairness, not one person rang me or came to me and said, "What was that thing you did? How did you do that? Will we expand that?" But no one came to me. So I was a little bit shocked about that, because I was like, you think if people like gave a fuck about the scene, because if we're going to Europeans in the worlds and stuff like that, sorry with the language Dan, if we're going to Europeans in the worlds, we're running a marathon, it cannot make sense that the first time we actually run the distance is on the marathon day. We need a scene here, and as you're saying, Ireland are great and Ireland are doing brilliant. It's not going to remain that way. I know as a coach that it's going to get worse. And
if Irish fighters don't know how to at least defend against wrestling, they're not going to win medals.
There's Russians over there getting paid. They're getting paid, right? These boys are being paid to be athletes. They come into the gym. they're communicating with their coaches, they're communicating with the other clubs, they're wrestling with the other best guys around, because I've asked them and I've had conversations with them as well. So they're going to keep getting better. We're falling out with each other over and over and over again.
I
think
don't
it's
think it's as bad as all that. I actually think they look at Ireland and they say, "Cripes, Ireland is huge teams. We're always the best fun at the
teams does not always
we're always the
mean
best fun at the IMMAFs.
Our athletes that's for sure. Number one, motherfucking having fun.
Our athletes are always at the set. You know, I was there. I saw the coaches there. Athletes are I saw a coach pull a fighter himself because he was concerned about something, and did it in a very sort of, this is what's happening, and then that same coach was like distraught behind the scenes that he did it, but didn't show that to the fighter. So I think people look at the Team Ireland and IMMAF, by the way, look at the medical setup in Ireland and they say this is the gold standard.
I agree, yeah.
They do. They'll point to us and they say you're the gold standard. But going back to the hypocrisy thing, so of, let's say, me being involved with IMMAF, an organisation that has 70 countries that include Kazakhstan or the Cameroon, we struggle to get blood tests. You can imagine getting a blood test in the Cameroon. We struggle for those fighters to even have access to blood tests. So we have to, again, diagarnig. And I've chosen that I choose the view that it's better to be inside there trying to raise the standards. Our own Joe Clifford was out in the Cameroon not so long ago, teaching, freely about
Joe's
cuts.
a great man.
That's the sort of thing that IMMAF brings, and I would say to those people who might say, that's just hypocrisy that you're not doing scans in IMMAF. I say, get involved with IMMAF. Get in there, and if you really have a problem about IMMAF not doing scans on all their fighters, get into IMMAF. It's the best thing, best organisation you'll ever see. It exists for fighters, and help to actually achieve that, because no one person is going to achieve that together. So that's what I would say to people who say that it's hypocrisy. Get involved. Join IMMAF. Bring your fighters in and be part of a process that will raise the standards of amateur MMA for all countries. Would it be safe to say
some people don't want to be involved with IMMA, and to be involved with IMMA you have to be involved with IMMAF? Is there a different way?
I think people are adults, and I think that if we remind ourselves that it's about the fighters,
exactly,
it's the fighters. They are the set. It is. We broadly, if we listened to what people say on Facebook about how safety should be run, or if an online poll amongst whoever that says you must do it this way, a Facebook online, should we get nowhere? So we listen to the fighters, and we welcome anybody who is a doer, and to the project, and that's the Safe MMA project. I'm sure if everyone just stands back and says, look, it's about the fighters, that handshakes, I think one of the things I've noticed in combat sport is if you've been a fighter, and a lot of people have fought each other or sparred each other, that there's a bond or a connection that's a lot stronger than some war on Facebook or something like that. And I think
the thing is that,
and those things will change. I'm sure that
if we have the safety thing standard and we have the outside and the shield belts, we really do need the inside now. So we really do need where people are competing. So, like as I said, wherever the reason is that all of the shows have dropped off, or people are not putting money into shows or whatever, there's definitely a lack of competition for people to get better.
Yeah.
And it'd be the same way as you are climbing a mountain, Dan. I know you've been up there, you've done incredible stuff, climbing halfway up Everest and stuff like that. So, but in the idea of climbing a mountain, you have to practice that.
Yeah.
So it has to be the full, really scene of what's put together. So, and I think that's what a lot of the other countries are doing really well, is that they actually have a scene. Because any fighter I went to look at that, any of my ear fighters were fighting, all of the lads, the Cork lads, the SBG Concord lads, the Rhino lads, all of the lads, I was watching who they were fighting. And they were at events where the cage was on the floor in a hall somewhere, and there was no lights, and it was very, very close to what it is, just scaled back.
Yeah. Remember, IMMA is a young organisation, right? That's the first thing. Again, I do not represent them. I go as a member of the public to their AGMs. That's all I know. Don't go to any of their meetings. But I'll tell you how. About 2012, myself and John, who's a good friend of mine, John Kavanagh, and Ashling, we this is a long time ago now, 2012 I think it was. We met with the then Minister for Sport and John Tracy, and John had the idea that, you know, MMA fighters again deserve to compete in a sport. They don't want to, and their generation now, that they don't want to be always these guys in, you know, this sort of tainted cage fighting that they can't tell their granny that they do or whatever. They want to compete in a sport, and so that was the purpose of and you know, at that time I remember they hardly knew what the sport was. Actually, they hardly knew what MMA was, and slowly there were more interactions, and I have to say that both Michael Ring and John Tracy had very understandable concerns about MMA. They were, at that time, there were still plenty of GA Hall type contests where there were no doctors present. There might be an ambulance. You know, remember what the scene was like, and so of course they had, how could we possibly call this a sport or welcome it into a sport? And for a long time, people like, you know, for a long time there was sort of meetings where it just kind of was slowly building, and slowly things were kind of getting there. And then João Carvalho happened, and everything changed. And it is certainly true that because I was at these meetings, and many of the senior people in Irish MMA were at these meetings, that the prospect of banning MMA existed. No one was ever going to say MMA is banned. The strategy was that ground and pound would be made illegal, and all they had to do was show the footage of João and the ground and pound, and they would have had no difficulty, and maybe even to this day would have no difficulty taking public opinion that way. We're not banning MMA, we're banning ground and pound, and that was the strategy. Even up until 9 months ago, maybe 6 to 9 months ago, I was at a meeting where John basically was asked one question: are you getting rid of ground and pound? And he said no, because it's MMA, not kickboxing, and he was asked to leave. That was the end of the meeting. This was a high-level meeting, and he was told, right, meeting over, gone. IMMA have been... It is true that people might say, and again, I don't know the backgrounds or the ins and outs, it is true that people suddenly want everything out of IMMA. IMMA primarily, I would say at this time, consists of people who are filling out forms quietly, doing stuff in the back at night, doing the sort of meeting with people who are decision makers, and trying to represent the sport, to try and bring it into the fold of being a sport, which then gives the young fighter, the young guy starting out or girl starting out, the ability to say, I'm an MMA fighter, which is a sport. I have part of a sport that has all the rights that any other sport has, also all the responsibilities that any other sport has, and that will have huge advantages to the sport. Insurance, just prestige. You know, I'm always reminded of, I think it was about 4 years ago now, when Michael Conlon won the gold medal in the World Championships amateur, and he was voted Irish Sportsman of the Year. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, he was presented with his medal by Ministerial Level and RT, and he was our sports person of the year, an amateur boxing world champion. That same year, Matthew Sheehan and Sinead Kavanagh got gold at the IMMAF World Championships. Arguably not much of a different achievement, and it wasn't,
it's very hard to change that.
Yeah, but there are people working very hard to try and achieve it.
Yes,
time. But a lot of it does mean doing boring stuff, filling out forms quietly, and I think that's not recognised enough. I think people, you're right, there is need for more shows. I would concur with that, and I think but that just requires people to do it, really.
So last but not least, where would you stand on the situation of somebody that wanted to run a show but wanted to go through Safe MMA like we did back in the day, but didn't want to use the brain scans?
I have no stance in that. They would not get Safe MMA. We in Safe MMA our medical policies are guided by the instructions that were given by 12-man jury at João Carvalho's inquest a year and a half ago.
But do you not find it crazy that we can drive 2 hours up the road then, and then the rules change? Now, I know that happens in America and it happens in different states, and if we go to England then, or if we were in Rome the other day, we were the only team that have the brain scans. Now, as I said, I'm for the brain scans, but we're
leading the way.
Yeah, but is it just
and we are doing it?
Is it just because you have to kind of just sucker up and go with it to lead the way?
We're leading the way, and we're doing it in a cost-effective way. Can I talk about the cost as well?
Yeah.
Do you mind? Because
No,
it is actually something that I talk about, because there's a figure that goes out there of €600 for, this costs €600 to compete every year as an amateur in Ireland, and that's being sort of continuously pressed, if you like, as an argument against scans, and it's false. So it needs to be recognised as false. So these are the costs. So if you're an amateur and you register with Safe MMA and you want to register for a year, and you have everything up in date for 2 weeks, if you've everything into us 2 weeks before the contest, it costs you just over €50 to register for the year. You can fight as often as you want in that. If you say I only want to fight once, or it's tested and you want to just sign up for 6 months, it costs you €25. That's all that Safe MMA charges, and that goes to pay a wage for Yanni, who is the administrator in the project, and anyone who's ever dealt with Yanni will know that he is the kindest, most considerate man for fighters, and he's perfectly entitled. This is his full-time job, and he's entitled like any other man to be paid for it. Everybody else involved in the process, myself, Aisling, the guys in London, we do it for free. We have always done it for free. This thing of, it's a monopoly and so on, I would ask you to produce a fighter that has ever paid me anything. The project has been subsidised quite heavily, actually, by those involved in the project for some time. So there is no money being made by Safe MMA, right? So that's the first expense. The second expense is the annual medical, I guess that depends a little. We like when it's a GP does it, because the GP knows your medical history and knows the fighter, knows the fighter's family and so on. GPs charge differently, of course, but let's say it's €80 to €100 for that, and you need your blood test only once in an amateur in the year, so that can all be done at the same time. And if you're smart, you'll get other blood tests done at the time as well, like your thyroid, your B12, your vitamin D, your white cell count, all of the things that any athlete should be interested in. You get them done, and they don't cost you anything. Blood tests, the commercial cost of the blood test is not, for any citizen of this country, is free if it comes to your GP. You may have to pay for the draw, the blood test, but the actual commercial lab cost is paid for by the state.
You hear that, doctor, motherfucker? I'm going to try to rob me again. Them from rob us all the time. I'm actually qualified in phlebotomy, because I have to administrate
Phlebotomist,
sorry, whatever it is. Phlebotomy is giving money away, isn't it? I always mix it up.
You want to be careful with your phlebs.
I'll tell you now.
And your phlegm.
So do you reckon I could go to doctors and take my own blood?
Yeah, well, autologous blood. So going back to that, it's also true that we're in Rothmionthon right now. I would say 50% of the people in Jobestown have medical cards. The national figure for medical cards in between the ages of 16 and 24 is 30%. So 30%, that's the 30% least advantaged 30% of our people have medical cards, and they don't have to pay to see their GP, and they shouldn't have to pay for blood tests either. Now, maybe there's some technical thing where the draw might cost you €20
like
or
€15, €20 fee at the beginning.
So the least advantaged in our country don't pay for the annual medical at all, or they shouldn't be paying for it. Now, if they choose to go to some private clinic or something like that, well, and if you leave it late, or you want to do that because your club is doing it, that's your choice. But we live in a country where the least advantaged do have access to medical cards. And then there is the Beth Noir, the MRI scan, which is €150, and it's once. and I again want to reiterate, this is a cost price subsidised scan, and I defy you to get it anywhere. And it's not just in Dublin. If you live in Galway, there's an MRI scanner in Galway that you can get it for that. If you live in Cork, there's an MRI scanner in Cork you can get it for,
people are
for
the
that.
expenses and stuff like that. But
Yeah, okay. So you have to pay for it. If you start adding up, I had to pay my petrol to get here, and someone has to pay for the lights.
That's the way it works. Absolutely, and it is the way it works. Dan,
so the cost, year one, if you're the 30% that's least advantaged in our society, then you have to pay for the scan. You shouldn't be paying anything or much for your medical, and it's 25 quid for 6 months or 50 quid for a year, and you can fight as often as you want. And I also want to say this, probably shouldn't be saying this, but there has never been a fighter who has not competed because they haven't paid their Safe MMA registration fee. Never. That's really important. So, we've never said someone continues to be red carded because they haven't paid the Safe MMA thing.
We have to do it now, Dan.
Yeah, well, maybe
with the red card.
Yanni and the project, I guess, is good at chasing up on, but we've never stopped someone because they haven't paid the registration fee. And after year one, really, if you've got a medical card, it should be €50 for the Safe MMA project and very little else. And if you're not, it should be the whatever you end up having to pay your GP. And it's not money for nothing. If you're an athlete, you're getting an opportunity to see somebody who hopefully can help you at least in some way. High level athletes know that they need involving health professionals and
nutritionists, all of this kind of stuff. Because there's amount of stuff that gets paid. People go out and buy these oxygen masks for bleeding €150 online and run on a treadmill all day.
Yeah. Or people, these flotation tanks. How much is that flotation tank costing?
A few quid now, there now.
How many scans do we get for it?
Quid, I paid my dues, All your motherfuckers can pay is our own dues.
Would it be more than 200?
It was an absolute pleasure to have you in. Remember that? Yeah, we get more than 200 scans for sure. But everyone wants fucking something for nothing. You got to pay for some stuff as well. That's just the way it works now. People go, but disadvantaged people. Listen, you're talking to your brother. Thanks
Can I just say one last thing in all of this? Again, let's always just remember, it's about the fighter. We have to listen to what the fighter wants and what and the fighter's parents, the people who are around the fighter.
They're going to be the people that you have to ring if something goes wrong, or
hopefully that's never going to happen again.
I don't think it will. I think we're in a better situation now, and I think we're much more equipped to be able to see it coming forward. That was episode 84 of No Shame with Professor Dan Healy. So any of the questions that we felt that I needed to ask and that I've seen floating around, I've tried to get them in, so I hope you did a good job on it. Look after yourself.